secrets of the past are all around us, hidden in our streets, buried under our feet. And in this series, I'll be uncovering those secrets as I explore Britain's most historic towns. I'll decipher physical clues. Look at that. It's covered with lizard-like scales. And get to know some extraordinary characters who are often overlooked.
He operated like a spy master. They lied, they deceived, they cheated.
With the help of Ben Robinson's Eye in the Sky, I'll discover which towns across the UK reveal the most about each period in British history, and find out how those stories still resonate today.
3,880.
More and more individuals are still dying from the plague.
Oh my goodness. From the adventurous Elizabethans to the elegant Georgians, from medieval knights through to the height of empire, I'll tell the story of an era through the story of a single town.
Today, I'm in a town that was the white-hot centre of Britain's steam-driven industrial revolution. Whoa! A town whose boom was fuelled by the transatlantic slave trade and its workforce by the commodities of empire.
Tea and sugar gave them the energy to keep forging forward. That's what really kept the Industrial Revolution going.
A place where colossal public works alleviated the misery of a new and desperate class of urban poor.
92% of those who lived in one-room houses had to share a privy, not a flushing toilet, just a bucket.
And where revolutionary leaps in engineering brought magnificent architecture, vast wealth, and the confidence to take on the world.
On the eve of the First World War, 18% of all ships launched in the world that year were launched on the Clyde.
That is astonishing.
If you really want to understand how the explosion of steam power transformed Britain forever, Glasgow is the place to come. Glasgow has always struck me as European, a place with a vision that goes far beyond the British Isles. It's Scotland's largest and most ethnically diverse city, home to two of the world's top universities. There's lavish architecture here, alongside dense urban sprawl. Music and enterprise, the fine arts and media thrive in this city beside the River Clyde. But you don't have to look far for clues of a time when Glasgow was one of the most powerful industrial centres on Earth. It was a manufacturing heyday that lasted long into the 20th century. I'm concentrating on a period of revolutionary innovation and vast expansion that began around 1850 and lasted until the 1930s. This was Glasgow's age of steam, when it became world famous for its ships and trains, earning the titles the Second City and the Workshop of the British Empire. The first steam-powered industrial revolution lasts from around 1760 through to 1840, with a subsequent wave of development with steel production, chemical production and shipbuilding transforming many of Britain's cities. There's a shift from a largely agricultural economy to an industrial one based in cities with a huge growth of urban population. Nowhere was the pace of change felt more keenly than in this city. But of course, it's not the start of Glasgow's story. Evidence shows the present site of Glasgow on a natural, shallow crossing point on the River Clyde has been settled since prehistoric times. The Romans made camp here, and the deep physical roots of the city we know today can be traced back to the 6th century. Over the centuries, Glasgow grew in size and importance, and by the mid-1700s, business was booming. The economy was dominated by products pouring in from Britain's expanding empire: tea, tobacco, sugar. And this means that Glasgow's success is inextricably linked
to the slave trade, because that provided the workforce, enslaved Africans on plantations in the Caribbean and the Americas. Glasgow, like many other British cities of empire, like London and Liverpool and Bristol, is now facing up to this difficult period in its past, this shameful period. When it came to exploiting the spoils of empire, Glasgow found itself at a distinct disadvantage.
To find out why, aerial archaeologist Ben Robinson is taking his drone 20 miles from Glasgow to the point where the River Clyde begins to open out into the sea.
It's a gorgeous day and I've got a spectacular view right down the River Clyde. I'm looking out towards the Firth of Clyde. It's just round that corner there. And if you sail out there, past the Isle of Arran, around Ireland, suddenly you're trading with the New World. You're out into the Atlantic. Tobacco, all sorts of stuff was coming in from the New World and landing here at Port Glasgow, because this was the premier port on the Clyde. Right back into the 17th century, this was where all the action was happening, not further down the river at Glasgow at all. I can just see now, if you pan now, I'm looking inland, and this settlement was laid out on a grid plan in the 17th century. There's still a bit of shipbuilding and ship fitting out going on here as well. But as we look round, there was a problem. Large ships couldn't get down the Clyde as far as Glasgow. The Clyde looks wide and mighty, but it's full of shallows, sandbanks. And that meant that the cargoes had to be taken off here and hauled overland with carts. If Glasgow was to grow and prosper, something had to be done to the Clyde.
And something was most certainly done, and done on an enormous scale. I've come to what's now a beautiful salt marsh nature reserve, just 15 miles from the centre of Glasgow. Today, it's a second home to migratory birds who've crossed the Atlantic for the muddy banks of the Clyde. Locally, it retains an unusual name that links it right back to the heroic foundation of Glasgow's rise to wealth and worldwide recognition. It's called New Shot Island Graveyard. I've come here to meet coastal archaeologist Ellie Graham.
There are lots of remains of boats around here. We've just walked over a couple of old carcasses of boats back there. What are we actually looking at?
It's where there's the last known survivors of the dredging fleet that in the 19th and 20th centuries worked to deepen the Clyde.
So the Clyde really needed to be dredged to get ships into Glasgow, but who was funding that?
There was a huge amount of impetus from the wealthy merchants who were trading with the colonies in the 18th century, who were bringing in tobacco and sugar, so slavery products essentially, but money was the driver to improve the navigability of the river so they could get their ships up here, really allow trade to flow.
How shallow was it?
It was incredibly shallow in its natural state. The engineer James Watt actually did a survey before any deepening work was carried out, and his work recorded depths of as little as 15 to 18 inches at low water.
So James Watt did this survey, but presumably also his invention of steam engines, and that would have helped things along.
I mean, his invention of the condensation cylinder obviously massively improved steam engines.
Is this a steamboat? I mean, it's got a stack there.
This is not one of the steam dredgers. This is the remains of a diving bell barge. So essentially, a diving bell is just an open-bottomed box, and it's had a pumped air supply, and essentially just through displacement, it created a bubble of air and a workable environment underwater.
So we're standing here in the chamber that the diving bell would have sat in and then descended down to the riverbed?
Absolutely. So there would have been two workers in here initially with picks and shovels to hack away at the hard, rocky areas of the riverbed, and it was all operated from this support vessel. It was constructed in 1852, and as far as we know, it's a completely unique survivor, the oldest dive support vessel that we know of anywhere.
And part of that story is this work that was done by hand. I mean, it sounds like a brutal job to have done, to have gone down in these diving bells, to hack away at the riverbed.
So we do have records of some really quite nasty accidents.
We talk almost in heroic terms of Victorian ingenuity and moulding nature to human will and that kind of underpinning then the success of Glasgow as a city. I think the heroism is here, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is where the sacrifice was made. So people saw the Clyde, despite its natural condition, they saw it as an opportunity to really connect Glasgow to the world. And they transformed it as people working here who allowed Glasgow to develop into the centre and the major city that it became.
That heroic labour went on through the 1800s. Between 1844 and 1894, over 45 million tonnes of rock and sediment were removed from the bed of the Clyde. The Clyde was now deep enough for large ships to make their way right into the heart of Glasgow, paving the way for the industry that would change the city forever. I've come to Glasgow, the centre of Britain's steam-powered industrial revolution and the ship and train-building capital of the British Empire. A place that exploded with scientific and industrial innovation in the late 18th and 19th centuries. I've learned how the River Clyde was dug out by hand to make way for cargo ships bearing tobacco, sugar and tea, the staple commodities of empire at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. The next industry to spring up along the banks of the Clyde would shape Glasgow for generations to come. But this time, it wasn't about the cargo that was being transported, it was about the ships themselves. I've come to the vast engine shop of a Clydeside shipyard built in 1870. It's now home to the Scottish Maritime Museum. And it's where I'm meeting Professor Richard Finlay aboard a Clyde-built steam puffer called the Spartan.
Richard.
Alice,
Hi.
how are you?
Right.
I'm glad you did that bit, not me.
So I wanted to talk to you about shipbuilding here on the Clyde. Why did shipbuilding take off to such a huge extent?
What you have is you have access to scientists, technicians, innovators, entrepreneurs who are able to exploit steam propulsion. That's very important. Secondly, you have the ideas, but you also have the workers who can then put those ideas into reality.
So we're not talking about mass production here, we're talking about actually quite skilled craftsmanship.
Because each ship is unique, you have to have the skilled workers who can fit the boilers, fit the pipes, the plates, the rivets, the whole kit and caboodle. It really sort of kind of gets into its kind of apex in the second half of the 19th century. In 1914, on the eve of the First World War, 18% of all ships launched in the world that year were launched on the Clyde.
That is astonishing.
One of the key things is the sobriquet Clyde built, because it becomes an emblem of sort of kind of quality, design, craftsmanship.
And why does Glasgow become successful in the locomotive industry as well?
Largely because it's the same skills that you require in shipbuilding. Locomotives are very much sort of kind of complicated engineering products. It's worth remembering that sort of kind of different railways around the world use different gauges, so there's a degree of specificity. It's not that they are sort of kind of mass-produced in the same way that they are, like trains are today.
At its height, Glasgow's biggest locomotive company, North British, was building more than 500 locomotives per year. And as early as 1876, 50,000 people were employed in Glasgow shipbuilding. By the Second World War, Scotland was producing 5 ships a week, the majority being launched from shipyards crowded along the banks of the Clyde, all owned by a new class of wealthy and influential British industrialist.
Are there any big names that still echo down through the centuries?
You have these kind of great industrial magnates that emerge all along the Clyde. Napier's, Laidlaw, Denny, Beardsmore. One statistic that sort of kind of demonstrates how successful that they are is that on a per capita basis, there are more millionaires in the Clyde conurbation than anywhere else in Britain except London.
And what about the contribution of the Scottish economy and Glasgow's economy to the wider economy of Britain at the time?
Just before the First World War, Scotland accounts, with about 10% of the population, for just over 17% of all manufacturing output. So it is majorly over-contributing to the British economy.
Today, the giant 174-foot Finniston crane is the last great reminder of the days when the banks of the Clyde resounded with heavy industry. That explosion on the Clyde began when the father of Glasgow shipbuilding, Robert Napier, started producing the world's most advanced steamships in 1842. His workers produced what was then the world's largest ship, the Persia, in 1855. And the Clyde went on to produce a third of all ships built during the First World War. In 1934, over 250,000 Glaswegians cheered the first ever 1,000-foot ocean liner, the Queen Mary, just one of the 30,000 ships launched during the great era of shipbuilding on the Clyde.
The banks of the Clyde are so quiet today compared with what they would have been like in the 19th century. But I'm standing here in Garvel's dry dock, which is the only remaining operational dry dock on the Clyde, and it's still repairing ships. But imagine what it was like here in the 19th century with furnaces going and the air thick with smoke and the sound of riveting ringing out.
It took over 1 million rivets to hold an average-sized steamship together. I've come to see the work it takes to make just one with industrial boilermaker Alistair McEwen.
So for the whole of the 19th century, this is how you make a ship?
Absolutely, yeah. So hand riveting.
Would there have been teams of riveters working on a ship at any one time?
Yeah, they work in gangs, so you basically had the rivet warmer, the holder-upper, and then the riveters themselves.
I was going to ask you what the holder-upper does, but I presume they hold things up?
Yeah, so basically they're going to jam the rivet and stop it being able to fly out the hole once they start trying to knock the rivet down.
Yeah.
So they've got a very important job.
And this is hot riveting?
Hot riveting.
You're heating the rivet up before it gets anywhere near the steel plates?
Yes.
And how hot?
We're talking white hot.
And was it dangerous work?
Very dangerous.
Right. Should we have a go?
Yeah,
I might
absolutely.
watch you first. I think it's always best to watch one before you actually attempt one.
The first step is to, we're going to heat the rivet. We'll light the burner.
You're using gas, they would have used coal-fired
so
furnaces.
It would have been coke back in the day, but this is gas.
Whoa! Glad I was standing back.
Yes, we're getting up now to the temperature which we're ready to go.
Wow, it's almost too bright to look at. That's amazing. Look at that, glowing. It's quite beautiful. Of that must have been absolutely deafening in these 19th century shipyards.
Very, and that's what most people would have suffered with.
So that's it, that creates enough of a seal, pulling those two sheets of steel together. Then you do a bit of hammering along the side of here, and that's it, you're watertight.
Yeah.
Amazing. Can I have a go?
Of course you
can I do the hammering?
Yep.
Okay.
Get you up there. Okay, it's all yours. How's the arms?
Good, but I don't think I gave it enough welly, did I?
Maybe a little bit more practice.
Yeah. It's not as flat as Mick's. God, imagine doing that all day. I'm very early on in my apprenticeship. I might be doing the holding upping for a bit longer.
Effort. For a first time, it's a great effort.
Thank you.
By the late 1800s, shipyards on the Clyde employed around 100,000 workers. And like Birmingham, London, and many other British cities of the period, Glasgow was undergoing turbulent social change. Around the world, wherever we see rapid industrialisation happening in less developed countries, we see this phenomenon of cities hugely expanding and sucking in that population from the countryside. And it's easy to forget that that's exactly what was happening right here in Glasgow in the 19th century. Stunning evidence of the living conditions of Glasgow's workers was captured by photographer Thomas Annan when he produced the earliest records of life in an urban slum. In 1821, Glasgow's population was 147,000. In 1868, when these pictures were commissioned, it had grown to over 400,000, making it 7 times more overcrowded than any other city in Britain. Today, around 73% of the homes in Glasgow are flats, and the buildings that give the city its unique character are tenements. But in the mid-1800s, housing couldn't keep up with the population explosion. Inside tenement buildings, extended families of up to 15 lived in 1 or 2 rooms with no running water, washing or toilet facilities. The average age of death for women living in these homes was 40, and for men, it was 38. To understand the effect this would have on the health of a new class of British urban poor, I'm meeting Professor Richard Rodger in Glasgow's East End.
As well as these overcrowded conditions, were they also unsanitary?
Yes, in Glasgow, for example, 92% of those who lived in one-roomed houses had to share a privy, not a flushing toilet, a privy. It would be on the landing, just a bucket. The bucket with all the human excrement in it might remain there for days, though it was often a daily chore for some child to take this down, dispose of it. So this is a really, really hostile place.
And presumably there were regular outbreaks of the kinds of diseases that we'd associate with such unsanitary conditions, things like cholera, typhus and typhoid.
Yes, very serious epidemics.
It's quite sobering to think of Glasgow, 100, 150 years ago, suffering the kinds of diseases that we associate today with slums in developing countries.
Yes, that's exactly the situation. But of course, from their perspective, that was the norm. Because if you were living in one of those flats, that was what you knew.
It's hard to imagine the strain that Glasgow is under, bursting at the seams with this increase in population, deeply mired in unsanitary conditions. Change was long overdue, and top of the list was a dependable supply of clean drinking water. Ben Robinson has taken his drone some 40 miles out of the city to look at the mammoth task that would provide the solution.
I'm at Loch Katrine in the Trossachs, north of Glasgow, and it is absolutely stunning. And as we get higher, I can see the whole view opening out before me. What I love is something of such immense natural beauty is also so useful to Glasgow. Now, Scotland doesn't lack a little bit of fresh water. It's renowned for having quite a lot of it, but it's not always in the right place. And nature often needs a bit of a helping hand. So did the city of Glasgow. It was growing enormously, but it was gasping for good, clean, fresh water. The problem is Glasgow's 40 miles in that direction. But Victorian engineers weren't daunted. I've got some wonderful pictures here, contemporary views of the huge efforts that they made. I mean, look at this, massive, gargantuan pipelines. There, tunnelling through solid rock, all with hand tools. Not much mechanical assistance for them. And here we have an aqueduct to span the low points, of which there were many. So trenches, tunnels, aqueducts, just extraordinary. And this is my favourite photo of the whole lot. This is the completion of the inlet works in 1876. And here are the commissioners proudly standing and celebrating their achievement. And as we fly over, I can still see that same structure here today. That's absolutely extraordinary.
Clean water was a massive step forward for public health, for the health of working men and women in Glasgow. But it didn't stop there, because this city was home to some extraordinary individuals whose pioneering work would pave the way for modern medicine and surgery.
I'm in Glasgow to understand how the steam age revolutionised British industry and led to a population explosion in towns across the country. I've already learned how a boom in ship and train building attracted migrants who worked and lived in appalling conditions. Monumental Victorian public works brought clean drinking water and helped relieve some of the misery. That alone wouldn't solve the problems facing Glasgow's working class. But help would come from within the great Gothic revival halls of the University of Glasgow. It's the fourth oldest university in the English-speaking world, but in the late 19th century, it was the world's most progressive, a hotbed of radical ideas that would have a lasting impact on British industry and health.
This is the University of Glasgow's famous Hunterian Museum, and it's packed full of reminders of Glasgow's industrial past. We've got scientific instruments and engineering models.
The most priceless and truly revolutionary item on display is also one of the most unassuming.
You can almost walk past this without noticing it, but this is a small but very, very important model with a crucial role to play in the Industrial Revolution. When he was at Glasgow University and tinkering with this model, James Watt came up with a crucial improvement in the design of the steam engine.
By changing how the cylinder was heated and cooled, Watt doubled the efficiency of the steam engine, paving the way for steam locomotion. It's an artefact that changed the course of British industrial history. But Glasgow didn't only produce revolutionary engineering. I'm here to meet medical historian Dr. Laura Kelly.
Laura, Glasgow played such a key role in the Industrial Revolution. We think of the kind of engineering advances that happened here, but there was a lot going on in medicine and surgery as well. So who was coming here to Glasgow University to study medicine?
Glasgow University, the medical school at the time, was really accepting students from a range of social backgrounds. So you've got people like James McCune Smith, for example, who was the first African-American medical graduate. He comes over from the States to study medicine at Glasgow in the 1830s.
That's astonishing, because presumably he couldn't have studied medicine in the States.
None of the medical schools were open to black students, so he really found Glasgow to be a much more open and welcoming place at the time.
Although, not that progressive, because this was a time when women were not admitted to medical schools.
So women don't come into medical schools in the UK until much later in the 19th century. So it's really quite a male-dominated, masculine, boisterous environment.
And some quite famous doctors emerging from that environment.
One of the key examples would be Joseph Lister. He really revolutionised surgery in the 19th century. So he developed something called antiseptic surgery. When you think about the past, surgeons used to do operations in really dirty aprons. They didn't wash their hands, they didn't wear gloves, they didn't clean their instruments. So Lister comes along and really changes all of that.
What other kind of advances were happening here in Glasgow?
John McIntyre sets up the first radiology department in Glasgow, and that's in 1896.
And it's so quick. X-rays are discovered the year before. The following year, you've got the first radiology department set up.
Yeah, exactly. So he really seizes on that technology, and he's an important pioneer. There was also James Byrne Russell. He introduces the system of compulsory notification. So, you see that today with COVID and the track and trace system. So that was kind of the precursor to that, really.
And that compulsory notification, that means if a doctor sees a case of a certain disease, they have to report that.
So it enables the medical profession then to kind of keep a track of where these outbreaks are happening and really monitor and kind of effectively control them.
And these are advances that when we think about them today, it's hard to imagine medicine and surgery without X-rays, without radiology. It's hard to imagine public health without those kind of ideas about sanitation. It's hard to imagine operating on somebody without doing it in an antiseptic environment.
Exactly. So all of these advances really start out in Glasgow, and Glasgow really pioneers medicine and healthcare as we know it today.
With public health back at the top of the agenda, it's fascinating to see how a single town contributed so much towards our understanding of sanitation and basic medical procedures.
Of course, the public health crisis in Glasgow in the 19th century was largely down to overcrowding, itself the result of mass migration into the city. And there was one particular group of migrants who really would leave their mark on Glasgow: the Irish.
During Glasgow's industrial boom, unprecedented numbers of Irish migrants deluged the city. And their experience established a pattern of mistrust that persists in Britain to the present day. I'm meeting historian Dr. Martin Mitchell outside a stadium that dominates Glasgow's East End to learn more.
So, Martin, when did the Irish start arriving in Glasgow?
Well, the Irish first arrived in significant numbers at the turn of the 19th century.
Yeah.
So Irish workers came over and they found work in the cotton mills, as handloom weavers. Irish men worked as labourers. So they were coming over for economic reasons. But there was another type of immigration that occurred in the 1840s, and that was the immigration of the famine Irish.
Yeah, that potato famine was absolutely devastating, wasn't it?
It was, and in terms of Glasgow, it's been estimated that in 1847 alone, 50,000 Irish people arrived in the city, and Irish tended to locate in the poorest parts of the city.
And how were they received within Glasgow? Because, you know, obviously we're aware that with more recent rapid migration, you can end up with a lot of difficulty between different populations and cities.
The middle class saw the Irish, and in particular the Catholic Irish, as the cause of most of the social problems affecting Glasgow. Disease, drunkenness, crime, prostitution, etc. And also the poor Irish were seen as a burden on the public purse, so they had to be provided for. Also, the religious factor was important. For example, in 1840, there were only 2 chapels in Glasgow for the Catholic community, and by 1900 there were 24. There were attempts actually to try and convert the Catholic Irish. So the churches would actually send missionaries into poor districts of Glasgow, but it never made much of a difference anyway.
Where does this link in to Celtic, though? Because you asked me to meet you here for a reason, presumably, Martin.
Yes. Well, that's to do with the foundation of Celtic Football Club. This is Brother Walfrid, who was one of the founding fathers. Football became incredibly popular in Britain from the 1870s onwards. It was a working class sport. So in 1887, a meeting that he helped organise resulted in the formation of Celtic Football Club. And the purpose of the club was to raise funds for the poor and needy Catholic school children of the East End of the city. And Celtic quickly became one of Scotland's most successful football clubs. And in 1967, Celtic, a club founded by Irish immigrants, for Irish immigrants in Glasgow, became the first British football team to win the European Cup.
And I love the fact that somebody's climbed up to Brother Wilfrid here and tied a tartan scarf around his neck, and that kind of says, well, yeah, you're an Irishman, but you're Scottish.
Again, very opposite, linking Scotland and Ireland, as he wanted.
Of course, football is like a religion today in Glasgow, with that enduring rivalry between Rangers and Celtic. But in the late 19th century, even the beautiful game would face some stiff competition when it came to entertainment for the masses.
I'm on Glasgow Green in the centre of the city where, in 1891 and 92, the workers of Glasgow came to briefly escape their gruelling lives. They came to see a gruesome spectacle that had been touring the world and was inspired by the brutal colonisation of Native American heartlands. It was called Buffalo Bill's Wild West. Professor Willie Malley has uncovered photos that tell a shocking story.
Buffalo Bill himself, who was he?
Well, no, he was a scout for the United States Army, and he was present at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876. After that, he gets this idea to be an entertainer, and for about 1883 onwards, he starts this, basically a world tour, a 30-year, never-ending tour till he finally went bankrupt.
I mean, it must have created a real buzz in the city.
An enormous buzz in the city. Poverty and entertainment have always gone together in Glasgow. There was enormous appetite for novelty, and this was for all the family. And it had all these different elements, kind of battle reenactment, a sort of history of the West, really the invention of the Wild West. That's what Buffalo Bill was doing.
So there were Native Americans in this show as well?
Yeah, the estimates are that there were 60 at least Native Americans.
Wow.
And they were supposedly a mixture of prisoners captured after the massacre at Wounded Knee, which took place in December 1890.
So he's bringing these Native Americans over who are essentially prisoners of war and then getting them to reenact the massacre that they survived.
Yeah, getting them to basically take part in a history that damns their own people.
And a supposedly primitive culture that was being extensively wiped out.
Yeah, then they have it presented as a story and a narrative that's about the triumph of the white man.
Buffalo Bill claims that Glasgow was where he did his best business anywhere in the world outside of Chicago. Contemporary photographs of the Glasgow performances have recently been discovered.
So this is a family photo album?
The family photo album of Thomas Lindsay, who was a professional photographer. There are some remarkable images of the performances, real live action footage, as it were.
Wow,
These two photographs here, you can actually see these, they're a bit faded tenements in the background. This is a spectacular photograph because it is an action shot. They were reconstructing things like the ambush, circling the wagons. We know this from Western movies, but this was really setting up the structure of what became the Western film. You've got wild animals here. You've got another image of a Native American just walking down the street.
I think this is such an astonishing, extraordinary image, this Native American person walking down a 19th century Glasgow street.
Thanks to these recently discovered images, Glasgow will never forget the tragic story of the Native Americans. The photographs also paint a picture of a working-class town where a week of hard graft in the shipyards and railway workshops was followed by a weekend of raucous entertainment.
But for Glasgow's burgeoning middle classes, life was very different.
I'm in Glasgow, the boomtown of the British steam age. I've learned about the harsh living conditions endured by the industrial workforce, but a small minority were to have a very different experience, one of fabulous wealth and ostentatious living. By 1870, Glasgow had become one of the richest cities in Europe, so it splashed out on this place, the City Chambers. It's the most grandiose council office ever constructed. Absolutely no expense was spared. The glass in the windows is Venetian, and there's more Italian marble here than there is in the Vatican. Just a fraction of it forms the largest marble staircase in Western Europe. The Royal Albert Hall in London was built around the same time. It cost £200,000. Glasgow City Chambers cost £552,028.
You can't imagine a modern council spending this much money on a building. I mean, it's so opulent. It is dripping with wealth. And it reflects the fortunes that were made by the lucky few who were in a position to benefit from Glasgow's extraordinary economic growth in the 19th century. Ben Robinson is taking his drone up over the West End to see how the wealthy elite were also investing in their own private homes.
I'm in Glasgow's Park District and looking at the centrepiece, Park Circus. This was the place to be. It's in a new development in the middle of the 19th century. They've physically got away from the rest of the city here. It's on a very elevated position and all arranged around this oval garden. There are curving terraces, great wide streets. We've got a bit closer in here and I can start to see some of the detail. Lovely sweeping terraces of houses, all very regular, very Italianate design, the height of fashion. I can see it's not just the housing that makes this place, it's the surrounding parkland. This is Kelvin Grove Park, and it was laid out at about the same time, mid-19th century, all based around the River Kelvin here, which is meandering through. Wonderful green space, a place to walk out into. Forget all the troubles and hubbub of the city. Really very elegant. If you had money, you had a good life.
Glasgow's middle classes may have been extremely comfortable at home, but there were also now institutions popping up in the city where they could socialise in comfortable, elegant surroundings. This is where an enterprising businesswoman named Kate Cranston comes into the story. In 1903, she created this, the Willow Tea Rooms, the last and greatest of her 4 quietly revolutionary Glasgow cafes. It's recently been restored to the way it would have looked the day that architect and designer Charles Rennie Mackintosh completed his radical Art Nouveau overhaul of the interior. And it had a customer policy that was radical too. Men and women were segregated, and it wasn't just aimed at the middle class. The working class were allowed in, although only to the bottom floor, while middle-class businessmen could play billiards and do deals at the top. Which is where I'm heading, to meet culinary historian Peggy Brunache.
I've just walked up through the different levels of the tea rooms, and they're beautifully decorated. Would they have been that beautiful back in Kate Cranston's day?
Kate Cranston was a patron of the arts, and somehow she came up with the clever idea of having a space where people could dine and socialize, but it also be aesthetically pleasing. That could bring in more clientele, that could bring in more women into that space, and therefore higher profits.
And it creates such a brand as well for her.
Oh, absolutely. Within, I'd say, 10, 15 years, with Mackintosh's unique Art Nouveau style became known not just throughout Glasgow, but probably all of Britain.
I did notice, coming up the stairs and looking at the room for the women, that there was a very definite colour scheme there, which was green, white and purple. I presume that is a political statement.
Those were the colours that represented the suffragette movement.
It kind of suggests that women are coming here perhaps not just to gossip, but to, have some political discussions as well.
Exactly. This undermines the idea that these are women who have very little to do, but lots of money to spend.
Kate Cranston was a woman ahead of her time, a patron of the arts and an activist for women's and workers' rights. The Willow Tea Rooms embodied all her ideals, and crucially for Cranston, it was strictly teetotal.
She sets up this business with people coming here to drink tea as part of the temperance movement in Glasgow. Where does that come from?
In Britain, the temperance movement really took off around the late 1820s, but its roots lie with the Quakers in the late 1700s, when the Quakers chose to not consume products that were using slave labor. But by the time we get to the 1820s, it expands to not consuming alcohol.
It's fascinating that it, to begin with, is part of an anti-slavery movement, because, of course, a lot of what Glasgow is making its money out of at the time was completely dependent on slave labour.
Absolutely. The tobacco, the sugar, all of these that end up being consumed at the same time here in a tea room, that was what kept workers going. They weren't allowed to be drinking alcohol, although I'm sure some did, but tea and sugar gave them the energy and the caffeine to keep going, to keep forging forward. And so that's what really kept the Industrial Revolution going in the way that it did.
The Willow Tea Rooms serves as a reminder of the extraordinary journey Glasgow had undertaken during the 19th century as it became the sophisticated second city of empire. The ultimate statement of that rise to prominence would be the international exhibitions staged in Kelvin Grove, where 73 acres of parkland were covered in vast halls bursting with examples of Glasgow's industrial and commercial output, alongside exotic produce from around the world. 6 million people attended the first exhibition in 1888, which was almost twice the population of Scotland. Profits from that helped build the Kelvin Grove Museum. It was opened to inaugurate the second exhibition in 1901. And for me, this building is Glasgow's finest moment. Reflecting the city's unstinting pursuit of excellence, it unsurprisingly went way over budget. It's Glasgow's greatest people's palace, a place where workers could briefly enjoy the physical trappings of the lifestyle of their employers. It's ostentatious, it's generous, and it's world class. But then, in Glasgow during the Steam Age, everything was world class.
Glasgow's success as a centre for manufacturing and shipbuilding in particular would continue right into the 20th century, but the foundations for those industries were laid in the glory years of the 19th century.
When hard-working men and women, drawn from across Scotland and overseas, toiled to create the ships and trains that changed the world. When terrible hardship brought about extraordinary breakthroughs in public health. A time when the institutions that remain to this day were established.
Glasgow is a city built on coal, iron and steel, and transformed in the age of steam.